Avianca Flight 52 is in trouble. The crew is exhausted. They're over New York City and almost out of fuel.
Are we cleared to land now?
Yes, sir, we are clear to land.
Tell me things louder because I'm not hearing it.
They're cleared to land. Soon the nightmare will be over.
Gear down.
Glide slow! Grade 500 feet.
The captain desperately searches for the runway at Kennedy Airport,
Lights!
but he can't find it.
The runway, where is it?
I don't see it. I don't see it.
Now they're battling violent wind shear.
This is the wind shear.
They're going to crash.
Take the landing gear up, landing gear up!
The plane has hardly a drop of fuel left. They cannot land. Flight 52 is about to crash somewhere over New York. How could that happen? Even the world's finest air crash detectives will never agree about who is to blame.
Relevance of testimony.
Southwest of Kennedy Airport, with a track brought up. What's the motivation?
106 to Main Street, north to base.
January the 25th, 1990. Air traffic controllers have been nervously tracking a massive low-pressure system approaching the northeast coast of America.
There was a system moving through the Great Lakes, moving east. There was a couple other systems converging. And a lot of times they'll converge in the New York area there, and the whole northeast will go down.
The weather is already near the safe minimum to land a plane. Flights will have to be cancelled or delayed. The terminals will be choked with thousands of angry passengers. Despite the terrible weather, the air traffic managers in Washington, D.C. order controllers at Kennedy Airport in New York to set a high landing rate. Air travel is vital, and they're under tremendous pressure to delay or cancel as few flights as possible.
There's pressure because that's the business they're in. The business is moving passengers from A to B. That's what the airlines are paid, and the controllers are paid to help that work.
Management in Washington, D.C. is pressuring New York to take on more flights than they feel is safe. Despite the weather, they want them to land 33 aircraft per hour.
We don't like it. We're going to have the worst possible conditions for landing aircraft at Kennedy Airport. We can't use runway 13.
We have to use runway 22 because of the conflicts with other airports.
And because of the winds, we don't like the rate of 33 an hour.
33 is it, and you'll take it.
Scores of overseas flights with thousands of passengers are already on their way. They have to land somehow.
What are we going to do with foreign traffic?
We'll just give them airborne holes.
Well, we know we're going to have wind shear and missed approaches, and this is going to be a very bad day.
I've got very bad vibes about this day.
No. 33. You'll shake it.
And that set the scenario at about 7 or 8 in the morning before we left Medellin. At 7 or 8 in the morning, the scenario was set for this accident to happen.
But within the next few hours, fog and low clouds have closed the main runway at JFK. Now, whatever their bosses say, the controllers won't be able to land 33 aircraft an hour. Nearly 4,000 kilometers to the south in Colombia, it's a warm, sunny day with not a cloud in the sky. Avianca Flight 52 is now boarding passengers for New York, among them Miriam and Luis Montoya and their 2 young daughters. After a short business trip, Nestor Zarata is traveling home to New York.
I received a telephone call telling me that if I could be in the airport in half an hour and not ask any questions or request anything, I would get on the direct flight to New York.
In the cockpit, flight engineer Matthias Moyano monitors the loading of about 6,000 kilos of fuel, making a total of some 36,000 kilos. Enough for the journey, plus an extra 2 hours flying time.
Avianca 052 Heavy, request clearance for takeoff, runway 11.
Just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Avianca 52 takes off from Medellin with its maximum allowable fuel load. The Colombian airliner heads north for the United States with 158 passengers and crew. By early evening, deteriorating weather has made flight operations at JFK appalling.
Continue to the left, heading 230 vectors and holding for Cameron again.
With no way of turning back the overseas flights, aircraft are forced to circle round endlessly, waiting to land.
Turn left. There is a wind shear alert on final at 1,500 feet. Turn left.
Controllers work frantically to keep track of the growing number of aircraft now in the skies over New York.
Airlines 251, you are clear to land.
JFK, any idea how long those delays are going to be?
I talked to someone else over there, no idea.
I'm holding over here. Delay's indefinite due to the weather. The traffic's missing the approaches. They're going around. I just can't give you a good answer. Your guess would be as good as mine. That's the best I can tell you.
JFK Airport in New York now only has one runway for landing, and aircraft are queuing up to use it. In the near blackout conditions, several planes have to abort their landings, which only adds to the delays. On Flight 52, they know none of this. The crew neither receives nor requests the weather for New York or for their alternate airport, Boston.
It's inconceivable to me that someone with a responsibility of other people's lives would fly into a deteriorating condition without checking about, hey, do we have a way out of this place?
Avianca 52 enters the airspace near Norfolk, Virginia. After 4 hours in the air, New York City is now less than 40 minutes away. 51-year-old Captain Laureano Caviedes is a seasoned pilot who's been flying with Avianca for 27 years. But his English is poor. All communications with air traffic control will be handled by the 28-year-old co-pilot, Mauricio Klotz. The third man in the cockpit, flight engineer Matthias Moyano, is experienced, but like co-pilot Klotz, he has only 4 months of flight time in the 707.
They were a highly experienced flight crew who had been into New York several times previously on behalf of Avianca. So they were familiar with the route and the procedures, and highly experienced pilots.
Washington, good evening. Avianca 052 Heavy, flight level 370.
Avianca 052 Heavy, Washington Center, roger. Avianca 052, I'd like you to make a right 360-degree turn, and I need you to get a pencil ready for holding instructions at Norfolk.
Okay, 360-degree right turn at Norfolk, Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052, you ready to copy your holding instructions?
Go ahead, sir.
All right, Avianca 052, you are cleared to the Norfolk VORTAC. Hold south on 174 with right turns and 20-mile legs.
Flight 52's troubles are about to begin. They're being diverted out over the Atlantic Ocean near Norfolk, Virginia, and placed in a holding pattern. Here, the aircraft will fly an elliptical racetrack pattern while it waits for further instructions from air traffic control. They don't know about the bad weather ahead, but with enough fuel for more than 2 hours of flying, there's no cause for alarm. This area in the northeast corridor of the United States is one of the most congested airspaces in the world. Incoming traffic from overseas is routinely directed through a pipeline of controllers before being cleared to land at one of 3 major airports in the New York area: JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. Tonight, Avianca 52 will come under the direction of more than 6 controllers, each of whom is trying to get the aircraft now circling over New York safely down on the ground.
Just got off the line. It's indefinite holding at this time.
080.
We
we just had 3 missed approaches on 22 right. We just went below the minimums. We just had 4 misses on 22 right, which is our primary runway.
The visibility is getting worse, and it's worsening.
All right, how many are you holding?
Well, we're still holding the 12 or 13 we had earlier. We're expecting some pretty lengthy delays in another hour, so.
While air traffic controllers try to cope with the increasing backlog of flights, Avianca Flight 52 circles for 19 minutes over the Virginia coast, waiting for permission to continue its journey to New York.
Avianca 052, expedite descent through level 33. Just leave flight level 330 within 3 minutes, please.
Okay, we'll leave 330 within 3 minutes. Avianca 052 Heavy.
The Avianca jet is on its way to New York at last, but they have no idea of the trouble that awaits them. Avianca Flight 52 is on its final approach to New York, unaware that conditions for landing at JFK are barely above the safe limits to land a plane. It's a pitch-black night with heavy mist, rain, and sudden violent winds.
This is Central. I was wondering how your weather was doing up there.
It's pretty bad at this point. We got all sorts of wind shears and missed approaches.
Due to not seeing a runway.
You're still trying on a 30 rate.
Yeah, rather unsuccessfully at this point. The winds are starting to pick up. 20% of the guys' attempted approaches
Went on to miss.
The plane has now almost used up the fuel planned for the journey and will shortly start eating into its reserves. The crew is considering diverting to their alternate airport in Boston, just 340 kilometers from New York.
Washington Center, Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052 Heavy, go ahead.
Do you have any information about delays to Boston?
Boston, I'll check that, sir.
Thank you.
The Washington controller asks his assistant to check on the conditions at Boston, but he gets distracted juggling other aircraft and forgets all about Avianca's request. While Flight 52 is left waiting for an answer that never comes, their precious fuel supply is slowly draining away.
Ask him about Boston again.
Did you ask about delays at Boston, or are we going to approach Kennedy?
Okay, Avianca 052, it looks as though New York Center may have to hold you for possibly up to 30 minutes.
You can expect clearance on course just momentarily with,
stands right now, an additional holding of at most 30 minutes. With that in mind, do you want to check on an alternate airport? I believe Boston is. I'll check on Boston.
Okay. We're now descending to 190 and expecting information about Boston.
Okay, Avianca 052, I've been advised Boston is open and accepting traffic if you do need that as an alternate airport.
Okay, stand by a minute.
Flight engineer Moyano begins to calculate how much fuel they'll have after an additional 30 minutes of holding. Even before they can respond, Washington Control directs them to another holding location.
Avianca 052 Heavy, make a right turn now to intercept the Cameron 2 arrival. Cleared on course, maintain flight level 190.
Flight 52 is now off the New Jersey coast in an area known as Cameron, less than 72 kilometers from Kennedy Airport, but it seems as far away as ever.
During all those holding times, I was praying and trying to see where we're going to land. I mean, when we're going to be on the ground. I don't want to be here anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I apologize for the delay, but it appears we're going to be holding as we wait our turn to land in New York. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened, and we should have you on the ground shortly. Thank you.
There was a point where the captain announced that there was traffic in the New York City area and that we would be on hold for a while and that he would get back to us.
It will be the last communication the crew has with the passengers. Flight 52's situation now goes from bad to worse.
Avianca 052, descend and maintain 14,000.
It's handed over to the New York controllers, who even on a good day can be intimidating. And today is not a good day. There are up to 39 aircraft trying to land and dozens more on the ground waiting to take off.
Avianca 052, expect for the clearance at 0139.
Avianca 052 Heavy, roger.
Tired and frustrated, the crew of Avianca 52 continues to circle the crowded airspace over New York while they wait for clearance to land. After more than 5 hours in the air, Luis Montoya is anxious to get his wife and 2 young daughters on the ground and back to their home in Queens.
As the flight started to prolong, we started to feel uneasy. My wife was carrying the baby at all times, and we were wondering what could be happening. After all, they weren't giving us any information, and most people began to feel nervous.
New York Center finally gives the crew of Avianca 52 the message they've been waiting for.
Avianca 052 Heavy, Aviar Kennedy is 2,400 feet. Can you accept an approach?
That's an affirmative, sir.
They think they're finally in the clear.
Avianca 052.
Then, calamity. The foul weather and zero visibility forces several aircraft just ahead of them to abandon their landing attempts and make a second attempt. The controllers have bad news for the Colombian airliner.
Avianca 052. Continue to the left, heading 230 vectors, holding at Cameron again.
Another hold.
Okay, 230 vectors for holding at Cameron. Kennedy, Avianca 052.
Avianca 052, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. You have any estimates, sir?
Avianca 052 Heavy, I might be able to get you in right now. Stand by.
Thank you.
The crew wait silently and hope. But when the reply comes, it's more bad news.
Avianca 052, we just got off the line. It's indefinite holding at this time. The Avianca 052, turn left, heading 090, hold at Cameron, maintain 1000.
They've been held up for 48 minutes on the way here. Now they've been circling around for another 25 minutes, only a few miles from the safety of JFK Airport.
They were progressively moving toward JFK, and they were held in the air for 3 times. This certainly would put some stress on the crew as to the fact they want to go from A to B. They don't want to fly in a racetrack for an hour just holding.
At 8:55, the cockpit voice recorder begins recording the last 40 minutes of Flight 52. The crew at this stage seem resigned, or are perhaps too timid to complain. Moments later, Avianca is given more unwelcome news.
Avianca 052, expect further clearance time 0205. Expect further clearance in 20 minutes.
It's now that the stress level in the cockpit begins to rise.
0205. Well, I think we need priority. We are passing out of fuel.
Avianca 052, roger. How long can you hold and what is your alternate?
Okay, stand by a minute.
The flight engineer quickly calculates the remaining fuel.
Yes, sir, I will be able to hold for 5 minutes. That's all we can do.
Avianca 052, roger. And what's your alternate?
We said Boston.
But it's full of traffic, I think.
Avianca 052, say alternate again.
It was Boston, but we can't do it now. We'll run out of fuel.
Avianca 052, cleared to land at Kennedy via heading 040, maintain 1000 at speed 180.
The Avianca crew, when they felt it, they were being handed off to an approach controller now and given a heading and a lower altitude. I'm sure in their minds they thought, well, they even commented on the cockpit voice recorder, we're being handled or we're being taken care of.
It's okay if I send 4 more your way?
Casino, I'm back in the hold again. I got 4 in the stack and there's no end in sight. I can't keep you times. I'd be guessing if I did. This guy's killing me. Avianca 052 only has 5 more minutes in the hold. You gonna be able to take him or I'll set him up to his alternate?
What is his speed now?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Holding speed.
Slow him to 180 and I'll take him.
Say again?
Slow him to 180 knots and I'll take him. You guys holding a lot?
Man, we're holding all up and down the coast.
Ah, that's good practice, man.
But in this critical handoff from one controller to the next, there is no specific mention of Avianca's critically low fuel.
Nobody told the next controller that. So the next controller, when Avianca came in on the frequency, the controller just said, right, I've got you, proceed to Kennedy, or I'm going to put you in a hold, and put him in a holding pattern over the last approach fix. The options were gone. Now the aircraft could only get into Kennedy.
Avianca
Avianca, descend and maintain 7,000.
Descending to 7,000, Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052, before you go, there is a wind shear alert
On final at 1,500 feet.
Turn left, heading 090.
Left, heading 090, Avianca 052 Heavy.
The high-level wind shear was passed on early on, so he was aware of that. But the low-level wind shear below 500 feet was not passed on.
After more than an hour and 17 minutes waiting for clearance to land, the crew of Flight 52 believe controllers on the ground are at last aware of their fuel emergency and are clearing the 707 for a priority landing. In the cabin, the flight attendants and passengers have no idea that their plane is dangerously low on fuel.
Then the go-around procedure is stating that the power be applied slowly.
In the cockpit, the crew now hastily discuss the go-around procedure, what the manual says they must do if they can't find the runway through the fog and low clouds and have to go around a second time. It's standard procedure.
Power be applied slowly and to avoid rapid accelerations and to have a minimum of nose-up attitude.
To maintain what?
Minimum nose-up attitude. That means...
Flight engineer Moyano is concerned that if the captain were to pull up the plane's nose too sharply, all the remaining fuel would slosh to the back of the tank, causing engines to stop.
Covered on fuel during the go-around. What it means is it doesn't contain fuel for feeding itself and a flameout could occur. And it is necessary to lower the nose again.
Right now we are proceeding to the airport inbound. We have 17 miles.
Roger.
This means we'll have hamburger tonight.
Avianca, descend and maintain 3,000.
Descend and maintain 3,000. Avianca 052 Heavy.
3,000 feet. They got us. They're already vectoring us.
No, they are descending us.
And they are giving us priority.
Avianca 052 Heavy, contact Kennedy Tower 119.1. Good day.
Only minutes before landing, Flight 52 is handed off to a JFK tower controller whose shift is about to end.
Avianca 052 Heavy, Kennedy Tower 22 left. You are number 3 following 727 traffic on a 9-mile final.
Avianca 052
Heavy, roger.
Can I lower the landing gear yet?
No, I think it's too early. If we lower the landing gear, we have to maintain a very high nose attitude.
So desperately low is their fuel that the first officer wants to delay putting down the landing gear, which will increase the aircraft's drag, requiring more power and using more of what little fuel they have remaining.
I was so happy. For me, it was like a joy. I mean, we're going to land soon and this is going to be end.
Avianca 052, what is your airspeed?
Avianca 052, 140 knots.
Avianca 052, can you increase your airspeed 10 knots?
10?
Okay, 10 knots, increasing.
Increase.
10 knots more.
Tell me things louder because I'm not hearing it. Lower the gear.
Gear down.
Avianca
052, 22 left, wind 190 at 20, cleared to land.
Clear to land, Avianca 052 Heavy. Wind check, please.
190 at 20.
With the weather deteriorating and flying on fumes, the crew of Flight 52 will have only one chance of getting their 149 passengers safely on the ground.
Avianca 052, say airspeed.
145 knots.
Are we cleared to land now?
Yes, sir, we are clear to land.
Stand by. Flaps 50. Landing checklist complete.
It was extremely important that Avianca 52 landed on their first approach, JFK. The voice recorder revealed that the captain was certainly quite concerned about the fuel state, and he was talking aggressively with the first officer, putting out flaps, getting the airplane configured.
It was time for the flight engineer to say, this is the only approach we're going to be able to make, and he didn't.
Give me 50.
Flaps 50 now.
All set for landing.
Standing by for lights. Slightly below glide slope. 1,000 feet above field. Instruments cross-checked, slightly below.
Stand by for lights.
Stand by.
The wind is slightly from the left, 190 to 20. Below glide slope.
With about 10 minutes of fuel remaining and nearly 4 kilometers from the runway, Flight 52 finds itself flying into violent wind shear, forcing them to slow the plane down.
they were getting like 60 knots of wind on the nose. And then as they descended on down through about 500 feet to the ground, they were down to 20 knots. So that's 40 knot change and 1,000 feet of elevation. That's a lot.
This is the wind shear.
Now the wind changes direction. It's pressing them down towards the ground.
Glide slope.
Glide slope.
Sink rate
Glide
500
slope.
feet.
Glide slope.
The captain desperately searches for the runway, but it's shrouded in low clouds and fog.
Terrain.
Lights! The runway, where is it?
I don't see it. I don't see it.
The plane's warning system is telling them that they're about to crash.
Glide slope. Sink rate 500 feet.
Just 4 kilometers from touchdown, Flight 52 has been caught in violent wind shear. To save the plane, Captain Caviedes applies full throttle, burning up more of the plane's precious fuel.
Give me the landing gear up, landing gear up!
The airplane was about 200 feet above the ground, about 2 miles from the runway, which was well below the glide slope and very dangerous. So the airplane almost crashed on its first approach.
When you get a missed approach, now it changes the whole ball game.
Request another traffic pattern.
Executing a missed approach. Avianca 052 heavy.
The operation of pulling the plane up in the missed approach was a very violent one.
I don't know what happened with the runway. I didn't see it.
I didn't see it either. I didn't see it.
Avianca 052, you were making a left turn, correct, sir?
Tell him we are in emergency.
2,000 feet. That's right, to 180 on
The heading, and we'll try once again. We are running out of fuel.
Okay.
What did he say?
I already advised him that we are going to attempt again.
Advise him we are in emergency. Do you tell him?
Yes, sir, I already advised him.
But the tower controller, at the end of his shift, transfers Avianca 52 to his counterpart in approach control. They'll have to begin all over again.
Contact approach on 118.4.
Approach, Avianca 052 heavy. We just missed a missed approach and we are maintaining 2,000. Flaps 14.
Avianca 052 heavy, New York.
Good evening. Climb and maintain 3,000.
Advise him we don't have fuel.
Climb and maintain 3,000. We are running out of fuel, sir.
Okay, fly heading 080.
Did you already advise him we don't have fuel?
Yes, sir, I already advised him. We are going to maintain 3,000 and he's going to get us back.
As they get back in the pattern and circle the field and come back in again. That again adds to the traffic jam that was being created at Kennedy Airport.
Avianca 052 heavy,
I'm going to turn you about 15 miles northeast and then bring you back onto the approach.
Is that okay with you and your fuel?
What did he say?
The guy is angry. I guess so. Thank you very much.
These guys were out, and they didn't say we were out. And he allowed the approach control to vector them way out in the original pattern and 15 miles north of the outer marker again.
Flight 52 is instructed to fly a long approach pattern for another landing attempt. The plane is down to its last dregs of fuel as the crew waits for final clearance from ground controllers.
And then they were run way out towards Long Island and vectored all around, which was equivalent to holding for another 15-20 minutes.
Did you get clearance yet?
Can you give us a final yet? Avianca 052 heavy.
Avianca 052.
Affirmative, sir. Turn left, heading 040. Climb and maintain 3,000.
Negative, sir. We are running out of fuel.
Okay, turn left, heading 310, sir.
Set flaps 14.
Okay, and you're number 2 for the
Approach. I just have to give you enough room so you can make it without
having to come out again.
Okay. We're number 2 and flying 360 now.
Avianca 052 heavy, turn left, heading 330.
The lights in the aircraft start to flicker, a sign that the engines are being starved of fuel.
330 on the heading, Avianca 052.
Once there's no fuel flowing through the pump out of the tank, an amber light comes on to tell you that tank is empty.
Flame out! Flame out on engine number 4!
Flame out on it!
Flame out on engine number 3!
From the runway.
The passengers can hear the sound of the engines beginning to shut down.
When the engines went off, I looked over to the lady that was sitting next to me, and I asked her to give me her hand. And I philosophically accepted, I might die here. This is it.
Avianca 052, we just lost 2 engines and we need priority, please.
Avianca 052.
Turn left heading 250, intercept the localizer.
250, roger.
Select the ILS.
ILS.
Avianca 052, you're 15
miles from the outer marker. Maintain 2000 until established in the localizer. Cleared for ILS 22 left.
Roger, Avianca.
You select the ILS.
It's ready on 2.
When all the engines flame out and the generators fall off the line, a considerable amount of power is lost, electrical power is lost.
In the cabin, the screams, the crying, and then this terrible sound of the wind against the fuselage as the plane drops from the sky.
Avianca 052, radar contact lost.
Avianca's missing due to the weather thing.
Yeah, Avianca 52 lost an engine. We're
Trying to find out why.
Yeah, we're no longer talking to Avianca. He's 15 northeast of Kennedy.
Ah, wonderful.
At Clipper 18, turn left heading 180.
6.5 hours after leaving Colombia, Avianca Flight 52 is missing somewhere over New York.
Yes, hello. I live in Cove Neck in Oyster Bay, and there is a plane crashed in our yard in front of our house.
When I woke up, the first thing that I did, I put my hand over here in my back, and I was bleeding. I said, "Oh my God, we crashed."
Both my legs were broken, and I had, blood all over the place.
El asiento en el que estaba sentada la hija mía, sí recuerdo que
The
estaba
seat where my daughter was sitting was totally destroyed by pieces of steel that happened to have come from the wing.
pedazos de hierro que entraron del ala y
I found my baby Daniela amongst the pieces of a torn-up, twisted chair. And I picked her up like this, and she was drenched in blood.
Bañada en sangre.
Avianca Flight 52 has crashed on Long Island, New York, less than 28 kilometers from JFK Airport. From deep in the woods, medical technician Bob O'Brien can hear the survivors before he can see the shattered 707.
What I first heard was there were just some people who were crying in pain, but it was apparent immediately what had happened when the plane hit the mountain and just stopped dead.
It just fell out of the sky. That's how witnesses describe the crash of Avianca Flight 52. A strangely silent crash.
There was not a big fire here. That will make it easier for investigators to examine if there were any gas or engine problems.
There have been reports of lightning in the area just before the plane went down.
The spokesman for the controllers union says that Kennedy is critically understaffed, a problem that is compounded by bad weather.
Rescuers have not yet given up on finding more victims.
Lo primero que me acuerdo es que yo miro y
First thing I remember is that I looked up and I saw a priest. He was praying for me and I was lying down on the ground. Right above us, I saw 3 or 4 helicopters flying over us.
3 o 4 helicópteros volando encima mío.
I managed to get up on top of the fuselage, and there's that door handle that says, in case of emergency, pull here. So I pulled that door handle, and that door handle just went, and the door came open about 4 inches. And then I was able to flip that over, and I could just see piles and piles of people strapped in their seats.
The extreme G-force of the crash has broken off the cockpit and catapulted it through a stand of trees and into the deck of a home some 30 meters from the impact site.
707 on behalf of Orange Music on a paper service.
Come on, somebody get the back.
And I saw some cables, and I saw a big hole in the fuselage over the passengers that were sitting next to me who were kind of unconscious.
And on top of me was this guy who was bleeding, and big guy, I don't know who he was, but he was on top of me, but I was sitting.
I pulled myself with those cables towards that hole, which was over the wing.
I started screaming, hey, help me out, help me, take me out of here. And then somebody, when they realized that I was alive, they removed they took away the guy who was on top of me, and they took me out of the airplane.
At that moment, a fireman was climbing on the wing, and he saw me, and he said, there's a guy here, and he pulled me out.
Okay. 37 fire and rescue companies from Nassau County are quickly mobilized. The rescue is the largest pre-9/11 operation of its kind in the New York area.
That little girl was sitting up on the fuselage and she was crying, mi madre, mi madre. And that imprint of horror just was, you just in your mind's eye focus right back in on, I saw mi madre, I saw her mother, and I know what that little girl was seeing. It was horrible enough for me, and I'm a professional rescuer.
I realized that my baby was dying, so I began to scream.
Please help me. I had the baby here, please.
The plane has crashed in the wealthy neighborhood of Cove Neck, near the home of the father of tennis star John McEnroe. Medics set up a makeshift triage unit on his lawn. When daylight breaks 10 hours later, 85 survivors have been pulled from the wreck. The lead flight attendant is the only member of crew to survive the crash. Of the 11 babies on board Flight 52, all but one are found alive. Bob O'Brien scours the tail section for survivors and finds FAA investigators struggling to remove the aircraft's black boxes.
I grabbed the handle and just pulled the whole box out and took that out and brought that out the door and gave it to them.
Even as people are being pulled from the wreckage, the on-site investigation begins. In charge on the ground is Barry Trotter of the National Transportation Safety Board. A former airline pilot, Trotter became an investigator after losing his right arm in a motorcycle accident.
The condition of the aircraft was really astonishing to see that that much of the structure was left in the condition that it was in.
Unaware of the details of Avianca's troubled flight, investigators quickly find a valuable piece of evidence.
You could look at the engines right away and you could tell the engines were not turning. So there was no power on the engines. That was the first big clue.
Trotter and his team examine the fuel tanks and find just a few gallons of jet fuel still on board. It becomes clear why the 707's engines stopped turning, but the question of who's to blame is still to be answered. In the community of Cove Neck, New York, salvage workers begin the task of dismantling the shattered remains of Avianca Flight 52. But there's still one critical question. Who is responsible for Flight 52 running out of fuel and causing the death of 72 passengers and crew? The answer will be worth millions of dollars and affect dozens of lives. At the lab of the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C., investigators are eager to recover data locked inside the two black boxes. The most telling of these is often the flight data recorder, which records critical information, such as the plane's altitude, airspeed, and heading.
When we recovered the flight data recorder and brought it to our lab in Washington, we opened it and found that the foil wrap was not hooked up, and someone had actually intentionally taped the end of the foil so it wouldn't fly around and put it back in the airplane.
Without the crucial flight data recorder, investigators rely heavily on Flight 52's cockpit voice recorder, which is found with more than 40 minutes of voice recordings of the crew and communications between the first officer and air traffic controllers.
Yes, sir. We are clear to land. Stand by. All set for landing. Low glide slope.
And it was apparent from the voice recorder transcript and tape that the captain was not understanding the first officer's radio communications that were being made in English.
Everybody wants to blame the pilot, but he may be the last person to make a decision, and the scenario which caused him to be in that position where he makes the decision was created by several other people along the route.
The captain asked the first officer about 9 times to clarify information or repeat it or to pass on information.
We are going to attempt again.
Faison, we are in an emergency. Do you tell him?
Did he make a conscious decision to run out of fuel? No. He was sucked into a situation by the air traffic controllers where he ran out of fuel.
Glide slow!
The cockpit voice recorder reveals a crew desperate to land the 707 in near zero visibility and in extreme wind shear without the aid of an autopilot.
In this case, the captain had a difficult time maintaining the glide slope during the approach with the wind shear, didn't see the airport, and had to make a go-around. That almost doomed the airplane at that point.
The information being given to pilots en route was a wind shear up as high as 1,500 feet. But their pilots on approach were encountering wind shear as low as 300 feet. And that wasn't passed on to the Avianca pilot.
This is the wind shear.
The crew of Flight 52 is caught off guard. As they descend below 150 meters and slow down, a violent vertical wind forces them towards the ground, nearly causing the plane to crash less than 4 kilometers short of the runway. Ironically, Avianca 52's lack of fuel resulted in no fire or explosion, saving the survivors from almost certain death.
If the flight would have found some level ground, it was conceivable he would have slapped the fuselage down and slid to a stop. With no fuel, there would have been no fire. And I think it's very possible that most of the people would have survived it in that case.
As the hearings into the crash begin, lawyer George Tompkins is confronted by controllers who maintain that the Avianca crew failed to use the word emergency, instead using the word priority to communicate their situation.
The government took the position that the pilot never declared an emergency, so no one knew that he had a problem. But saying you're getting low on fuel and saying you cannot make your alternate, the word emergency is not necessary to say.
Negative, sir. We are running out of fuel. We just lost 2 engines and we need priority, please.
And they thought they were telling them when they said we need priority.
Para nosotros en español la palabra prioridad significa.
In Spanish, for us the word priority means first.
Corre a mí, te estoy necesitando.
Attend to me, run to me. I need you right now.
No sé si es que
I don't know if priority in other languages means that you can wait.
Significa que puedes esperar.
Avianca 052 only has 5 more minutes in the hold.
You gonna be able to take him, or I'll set him up to his alternate?
What is his speed now?
I'm not sure, to be quite honest with you. Holding speed.
The NTSB concludes that air traffic's handling of Avianca 52 was proper, considering the information they were getting from the flight crew. Many of the passengers are shocked and outraged by what they feel is a gross injustice, that air traffic control is found blameless. Avianca sues the Federal Aviation Administration, which employs the air traffic controllers, saying they should have done more when Flight 52 told them they were running out of fuel. The FAA settles and ends up paying around 40% of the estimated $200 million compensation due to the victims.
If you listen and read the tapes, the transcripts of the tapes of each air route traffic control center along the route, and the final, the New York Tracon, New York Tower, Kennedy Tower, you'll find 20 places where this accident could have been avoided if somebody had done something differently.
Among the 85 survivors who escaped the shattered remains of Flight 52 are the Montoya's two daughters. Daniela, the baby covered in blood, is now a healthy teenager preparing for college.
The day just before the flight, we took a long trip to visit the Virgin Mary. This is a very important sanctuary in Medellin. Perhaps it was a miracle of God and the Virgin that the four of us survived. It was a miracle, and we feel blessed by that.
For many of the survivors, recovering from their injuries has been easier than coming to terms with the reason why Flight 52 ran out of fuel.
I had to learn to walk from scratch. It's difficult enough to deal with the injuries. It makes me very angry to think that a plane went down with 161 souls and had almost half the people lost their lives because of a word.
Fast. You have 811 Heavy? Do you have the airport in sight?
It's over here to the right, Captain. Okay.
Okay, we have the airport. United 811 Heavy.
811 is clear to land 8 left. Equipment standing by. Wind 05012.
Clear to land. 8 left, United 811 Heavy.
As the unstable 747 lined up for landing, the pilots knew they would only have one chance. But even if they got it on the runway, the nagging question remained. Would the stress of impact cause the damaged and overweight aircraft to disintegrate? Severely damaged, with an unstable airframe and losing altitude on just 2 engines, Flight 811 now began its final approach to Honolulu Airport.
2-engine approach. 2-engine approach.
We still had no idea how far off the ground we were, if we were going to make it to Honolulu or not. But that seemed like an appropriate time. If we were somewhere around land, that we're probably going to try and land somewhere to get the passengers in their brace positions. So that's when we started yelling for them to get down in the brace positions.
Every molecule in my body combined to express, get this damn airplane on the ground.
Well, how are we doing on the hydraulics?
Hydraulics are good.
You got brakes?
Normal hydraulics. So we got brakes, but you're only going to have reversing on 1 and 2.
Though I thought maybe there was a chance that we were going to actually be able to attempt to land, the thought came to my mind, what happens now? Do we, on impact, do we explode? Do we fall out this huge hole?
Despite dumping fuel, the aircraft was still critically overweight, but without full flaps to keep it in the air. It had to approach fast.
1,000 down.
The danger was that the undercarriage could shear off and the plane break up.
Top and a half high. 190. 185. A little slow, Dave. It's below what we want. Coming up on the glide slope.
Okay. Now let's try the gear.
No one knew if the explosion had damaged the landing gear.
I remember Laura saying to me that she didn't hear the landing gear go down. And it was loud, it was still loud, and I didn't hear the landing gear go down. So that's another thought. Maybe they can't get the landing gear down. Maybe it's not down.
You've got Gear down, we're clear to land, and everything's taken care of as far as we know. $200. $195. Half a dot high. Looking good. 192. 195.
Coming off in the power.
100 feet. 50 feet.
Center the trim. Center the trim.
30. 10. 0.
We're on.
Gears holding.
We landed. It felt fast. And that was my next concern, is that we weren't going to stop at the end of the runway, that we were just going to keep going.
And all of a sudden we were slowing down, and I said, oh my God, we've landed, we're on ground, and the people started applauding.
Probably the best landing I've ever made. When we finally stopped on the runway, we deployed all 10 chutes, and the flight attendants evacuated all the passengers.
It's amazing how fast everyone went. My understanding is like less than 45 seconds, 330 people were off the airplane.
We were probably 20 feet off the ground, and I would have stepped out of the airplane without a slide. I wanted to get off so bad.
When we got all our switches off, I ran through the airplane, made sure there was no one else on the airplane, came up to the door one left, and went down the slide, and I came around the front, and I saw that humongous hole in the side, and I just couldn't believe it. By the grace of God, we made it, and it was an awesome experience. I would never want to go through that again.
It was crazy, it was wild, it was scary, all at the same time. I just thought that that was the end, that we were going to die. I mean, that was my first thought, that this is the end.
But for the families of the 9 people who were killed, the ordeal was just beginning. Kevin and Susan Campbell's son, Lee, had been flying home.
About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think they said that there was no New Zealanders involved, but we just knew that it was Lee. And then about, I suppose, a quarter of an hour later, we got a phone call from Chicago, and they just said that they regret to inform us that our son was missing, presumed dead. And I guess about another hour after that, a policeman arrived at the door, and he took one look at us and he says, I can see that you've had the news. So it was just an awful day. And it certainly didn't get much better for a long time.
Although Lee's body had not been recovered, the Campbells flew straight to the wrecked aircraft in Honolulu.
Your initial feeling is that you want to be as close to the spot where your relative died, and that was the aircraft. So we had to immediately go in and see the aircraft.
The damage inside was horrific, just a total mess. And the hole in the side of the aircraft was much bigger than I had thought it would be, even though we had seen television newsreel reports. And it was so sad to get in and actually see where Lee's seat had been. The legs of the seat were still there. There was a good bit of fuselage beside him and still a window.
But the Campbells' desire to find the cause of Lee's death inevitably brought them face to face with the dreadful details.
They took us to the medical examiner's office as well, because they had found body parts and that sort of thing. So they didn't actually show us the body parts, but they showed us bits and pieces that they had recovered from the engines, and we got the medical examiner's report on what they had recovered. So, you know, we really would have preferred that it was Lee that went through the engine, because it would have been an immediate death, whereas it was a 4-minute fall down to the ocean, and we know that the people could have been alive as they were falling. And when you think about that, that's just horrific.
As it became clear that their son's body would never be found, the Campbells' need to find the cause of the accident that killed him grew stronger.
Lee can't have died for nothing. You know, you've got to find out why he died, and you've just got to make sure that it never happens again.
The Campbells embarked on a relentless personal investigation that would last nearly 2 years. But the loss of their son meant they would stop at nothing to uncover the truth.
The engines number 3 and 4.
2 months after the accident on Flight 811, when the National Transportation Safety Board held preliminary hearings, the Campbells made sure they were there. But they soon grew frustrated. The NTSB would not complete its report for months, so the Campbells took matters into their own hands.
This accident was the sudden opening. We certainly weren't going to leave it to the NTSB to come up with the findings. We were going to follow through. And when the hearings ended, they had said that we could take whatever we wanted off the press table. And Susan walked up to the top table and yelled out, "There's a really good setup here." So grabbed a box and loaded in all of the documents that we could find up there.
Kevin's the most honest of people I know, but here he was taking something that we hadn't specifically been told we could take.
And we're heading out the door just as the NTSB were arriving back in with the trolley to pick up all their documents. So we were out the door and into a taxi and gone.
So we quickly realised we'd got a really good set of papers with a lot of things that hadn't been released to the public. We were able to really start our investigation in earnest at that stage.
The unpublished documents revealed a disturbing catalogue of problems with the forward cargo door, going right back to its original design. Instead of a plug door that gets jammed into its frame as the aircraft pressurizes, Boeing opted for an outward opening door. This allowed for more cargo space, but was not fail-safe like the plug design. So Boeing built what they believed was a foolproof locking mechanism.
What they do is they build in multiple redundancies to make sure the door is properly latched and does not open. And you build it in to a point of that it's extremely improbable that the door would ever open.
So what went wrong on Flight 811? The Campbells soon discovered the problem lay in the design of the locking mechanism. To lock the cargo door on the 747, electric motors rotate C-shaped latches around pins in the door frame. A handle then moves L-shaped arms, known as locking sectors, over the top of the C latches to prevent them from opening. But as early as 1975, problems were found with the locking sectors. Kevin Campbell, an experienced engineer, built a model to show the weakness in the Boeing design.
Initially, the locking sectors were made in aluminium, and in 1975, Boeing realised that they weren't strong enough, and they actually doubled up the aluminium to make it double thickness. But it still wasn't strong enough, and a lot of the airlines didn't even put the doublers on anyway.
The weakness of the aluminum drastically increased the risk of the door accidentally opening.
With the aluminium locking sectors, if the C-locks tried to backwind, open electrically, it would just push the locking sector out of the way. It just simply wasn't up to the job that it was designed for.
For 20 years before the catastrophe on Flight 811, 747s had been flying with this crucial weakness. The Campbells wondered what else remained to be revealed. They redoubled their efforts to uncover the full truth behind the accident that had killed their son.
We bought a car and set off in the United States to see as many people who were involved with the accident as possible. We started at Seattle, crossed to Chicago, through to Washington, D.C., down to Kentucky, on to Miami, and back across to San Diego, back up to Seattle. And that was just one trip.
The Campbells soon found that a shockingly similar incident to Flight 811 had given clear warnings of the danger in the cargo door. In 1987, 2 years before Flight 811, a Pan Am 747 had been climbing out of Heathrow when it failed to pressurize at 20,000 feet. The pilots had to turn back.
When they got back to Heathrow, they found that the door was hanging open 1.5 inches at the bottom, and all of the locks were open. When it got to the maintenance base, they found that all of the locking sectors were either bent or broken.
Why had the sea latches turned and bent back the locking sectors? Boeing claimed that ground crew must have mishandled the mechanism. But the Campbells' investigation uncovered another vital clue to why the sea latches had turned. A report highlighted problems with the door's electrical system.
It had a fault in the S2 master latch lock switch that should have turned off the power to the door when the outer handle was closed.
This was an alarming finding. When the outer handle was closed, the S2 master lock switch was meant to disconnect the power supply and stop the C-latch motors from turning. So could this have failed, allowing the motors to open the door? To find out, Boeing asked the airlines to do a simple test: close the outer handle, then press the switch to open the door, and see what happens.
When they hit the switch, it actually worked. Boeing thought, this is not going to work, but it actually worked. There was power to the door locks with the outer handle closed, and the lock started to move, and it started to force the locking sectors out of the way. And a few days later, the airline started ringing in and saying it was damaging their planes. So Boeing stopped the test. But it meant that on those aircraft, the S2 switch had failed, which is a silent failure. And all of those aircraft were likely to have the same problem as 811. They were just waiting for a short circuit to open the doors.
The Campbells now became convinced that the accident on Flight 811 began with the failure of the S2 switch. Power remained onto the C-latch motors. All it took was a short circuit in the 20-year-old wiring, which had been found to be frayed on other aircraft, to start the motors up. The aluminum locking sectors were too weak to stop the latches turning, and the cargo door burst open.
The National Transportation Safety Board determines that
After a year of investigation, the NTSB had a different version of the events. The Campbells were in for a shock. After waiting a year for the official report, Kevin and Susan Campbell expected it to match their theory of what led to the accident on Flight 811.
I assumed that we would have a report come out that this was an electrical malfunction, and was staggered when they came out and said that the door had been mishandled.
For the Campbells, the NTSB's flawed explanation and failure to mention the electrical problems just wasn't good enough. They went back to investigating the accident on Flight 811 and soon found disturbing evidence of how it could and should have been prevented. After the Pan Am incident in 1987, it turned out that Boeing had issued a directive to the airlines on how to correct the weak aluminum locking sectors.
The airworthiness directive that came out was to replace the aluminum sectors with steel sectors that could not be bent. And there were some some interim requirements for inspections to be performed until what they call terminating action, the steel sectors were installed.
The fix was cheap and simple, but getting it done was not.
The actual cost of the modification, changing these locking sectors to steel, was $2,000 per aircraft. But it took 10 hours to do it, and that's where the money was. Taking the aircraft out of service for 10 hours, that's millions of dollars.
The Campbells discovered that back in 1988, the FAA, whose role it is to enforce improvements, had given the airlines 18 months to comply. Within a year, Lee Campbell and 8 others would die in an avoidable accident. So why weren't the airlines forced to fix the problem sooner?
If these airplanes, these large commercial airplanes, are grounded, it's an economic disaster. So what they do is they lobby in the regulatory agency in the United States, it's the FAA, to allow them to do the fixes over time when the airplanes are in for normal maintenance. And that way, they're not taken out of service. But when they do that, when they allow the airlines, the air carriers, and the manufacturers to fix these over time, in essence what the FAA is doing is they're gambling with the lives of the passengers and the crew that are flying the airplanes during the time they're not fixed.
After the deaths on Flight 811, the FAA instantly shortened the deadline for fixing the cargo door from 18 months to just 30 days. The pressure of the Campbells' campaign eventually began to pay off. The vital piece of evidence that could prove them right, the cargo door, still lay 2 miles down in the Pacific Ocean. But as articles appeared in the American press, the NTSB commissioned the U.S. Navy to search for it. 100 miles south of Honolulu, a deep submersible began to trawl the seabed.
We went to Honolulu and waited there while they had their attempts. And they finally recovered the door from 14,000 feet of water, which was the deepest recovery ever at that time. And we were phoned within an hour of it coming out of the water.
But before the Campbells could see it, the door was swiftly removed to Boeing's plant in Seattle. The Campbells went in hot pursuit.
We went over to Boeing, and they wouldn't show it to us. So they reckon that the crucial pieces had gone to the NTSB. So again, we got in the car and drove across to Washington, D.C. We arrived at Ron Schleid's office, and Ron looks at his watch and he says, "I can give you 5 minutes." So about 3 hours later, we had the pieces that they recovered in our hand. And they acknowledged that we're definitely correct. It was an electrical malfunction.
Finally, the NTSB publicly issued a revised report that concurred with the Campbells' version.
There was an inadvertent failure of either the switch or the wiring that caused an uncommanded opening of the door.
It's nice that other people know that you're right and had been all along, and that the support that they had given you was vindicated.
The Campbells spent thousands of dollars of their own money on their campaign. They were never interested in a financial settlement for Lee's death, but they did persuade United and Boeing to set up a university scholarship in his name.
I couldn't have lived with myself if we had done no investigating ourselves. It was just something we both felt we needed to do. We didn't even discuss it. We just knew that's what we would do.
Yeah.
But despite long and public campaigns like that of the Campbells, critics fear that the airline industry has not learned the lessons from Flight 811.
The regulatory agencies, they have a dual charge. One is to encourage aviation, and another is aviation safety. And when they get in a position where you have economics up against air safety, they tend to err on the side of economics rather than safety.
Serious accidents caused by known defects have continued to occur. In the 1990s, known problems in aircraft de-icing systems led to crashes. At least 3 planes have had fatal fires due to known dangers from flammable insulation material. In 1998, a fully laden 747 blew itself up over the Atlantic when known faults in the old wiring ignited known hazards in the fuel tanks. Inevitably, experts are skeptical about the industry's record of balancing profit against prevention.
And what the industry says, you know, to go in and replace this wiring would ground all these airplanes, would be astronomically expensive. You know, one airplane every 10 years, one airplane every 5 years, 200-300 people, cost of doing business. Cost of doing business. And that's a great economic analysis, and unless your mother or your child is on board one of these airplanes that happens to pay the price for their economic satisfaction.
For some of the survivors of Flight 811, the cost has been heavy.
Each crew member handled it differently. I know there are still 2 crew members that have never set foot on an aircraft again. It was very difficult for me. I was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. You can't reason, you can't think. Making the slightest decision is very difficult. You're just at a total loss. So it was very difficult to cope with.